It's great to see everybody here today. Thank you for coming together with us at this relatively late hour in a workday or the early evening for some, and especially on a beautiful day like today when most of us would probably like to be out in the woods or on the river or having a picnic. So thank you very much for your presence and for your engagement tonight. My name is Glenn Montgomery. I am the Executive Director of Vision Action Network.
And hi, everyone. My name is Chi Win. I'm the Executive Director of Apano.
And on behalf of Van and our partners who have helped prepare and design and execute this event tonight, we welcome all of you. I want to share a little bit about what we're planning on doing this evening. And I'm going to let you hold on to that for a sec while I try to find my clicker. We've got so much to do tonight, but we're hoping to have a lot of fun doing it. So we're going to do a little bit of a recap. Many of you were involved in the event in January, the first event that we had. But a lot of you were not. I was so impressed at not only the number of people that came back for this event, but all of the new faces that are here tonight that were not there. So for the benefit of those who weren't, and for those whose memories are like mine, we're going to do a little bit of a debrief on that event. And then we're going to share about some community conversations that we've been having over the last couple of months since that event. And we're going to have an opportunity to go back out into that lobby area during our meal hour and see what our cities and our county have been doing around the issue of racial equity. So you'll see, if you didn't notice already, there were posters out there of the various cities in the county. And so you'll have a chance to look at those and to talk with staff from those jurisdictions. We'll come back here and we will engage in an interactive conversation amongst ourselves. Not dissimilar to the one we had on January 31st. It was very energetic. There was a lot of creative ideas. But we're going to be taking the ideas, the best ideas that we came up with in January, and we're going to try to figure out what steps do we need to take to turn those ideas into action? How do we move those ideas into action? And then we'll have a little bit of a wrap-up after that, and we will send you on your way, hopefully feeling a little bit more inspired and a little bit more committed to this work that we're doing. So I'm going to hand this off to Chi, and she's going to talk a little bit about the agreements that we will keep while we're here together.
Thank you, Glenn. So we ask that you remain engaged for the entire event. I know it's really hard to keep not being distracted. But for whatever reason that you find yourself distracted, take a deep breath, ground yourself, and bring yourself back to the group, because we know you have so much to offer. Your experiences, your critical thinking skills, your creativity. So bring those to bear in our conversations. Listen to understand and to collaborate rather than to debate. Honor the truth as you see it, and do it with respect for those around you. Try to make connection and build upon the ideas of other people. Consider how it might be possible rather than impossible. There will be things left undone, like Glenn said. We can't solve all of the world's problems in 3 hours. So allow some ambiguity and in the incompleteness to the work today. And for those who tend toward stepping back and being more quiet, try to challenge yourself by stepping in with us and leaning into this work. And for those that has a tendency to speak up, try to make room for those to come forward.
Great, thank you. Any questions about those agreements? All right, we are going to step forward and start with our community conversations. But before we do that, let me share that brief recap that I was talking about. At the January 31st event, we did some crowdsourcing. We had a really fun, active, engaging exercise that led to some great ideas on the themes of civic engagement, economic empowerment, and education. Those were three of the themes in the call to action from the Leading with Race report. That was kind of the impetus behind this event. If you haven't had a chance to look at that report, I encourage you to go to the Coalition of Communities of Color website. You'll see both an executive summary and the full 394-page report. So we chose those three themes and came up with some ideas. We had, as the slide shows, over 200 people, and 40% self-identified as people of color. That's about the same. We've got about 43% of our registrants this time. So it's wonderful to see the diversity in the room, to get the backgrounds, the different backgrounds and perspectives at the table so that we can have these kind of rich conversations. These are the ideas. These were the top ideas. There were close to 200 that we had on little 4x6 index cards. And we had to distill those over the course of less than a half a day and come up with the 11 ideas that got the most votes. And these were those 11 ideas, sorted by the theme. They're also, and they should be on your table. I don't know if you have hard copies of those on your table. If you don't, this is a note to Fernanda, if she's around, that we have those hard copies somewhere. So we will have those for our conversations later on in the evening. These are organized by the most votes to the least votes, if you will. So if they're ranked in priority, for example, increase engagement and representation of people of color on all civic boards and commissions, that was the #1 vote getter in the civic engagement theme and across the board for education and economic empowerment. If you want to really see what that looked like, here's what it looked like. So the descriptions you can see are kind of off of that screen. I apologize for that. But the top vote getter was the equity education, equity training for students, teachers, parents, and administrators. That was the #1 idea across the board. And then the next was an idea under the economic empowerment theme, which was about removing, or at least reducing, coming close to eliminating the barrier of the criteria that keep people from accessing affordable housing, whether it's a criminal background, addiction, an eviction, those types of things that continue to perpetuate the problem for people finding affordable housing. So I could go down the list here, but you can see that there were three that were kind of the top vote getters, followed by a couple of in the middle, and then trailing with the others. But we're going to be looking at these as we move forward in our event tonight. So now, having given you just that broad brushstroke of what took place on the 31st, let's start talking about what we're going to be doing today and what we have done since the 31st. So Chi's going to introduce some folks who will chat with us a little further.
So as Glenn said, we'd like to give our community partners an opportunity to share briefly what they've learned during the community conversations they hosted since January's forum. At this moment, I'd like to invite Maribel from Adelante Mujeres to come to the stage.
Yay. Hello, everyone. Hi. This is great practice for me for when I win an Academy Award. Yeah. Thank you for being here and for really being allies in this work that we're doing here in Washington County. My name is Maribel de Leon. I am the Director of Microenterprise Programs at Adelante Mujeres, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we did after the January forum with our participants and our staff at Adelante. Sure. So we had listening sessions with our participants, with our staff. We're about 50 plus or so of our community members, specifically we're talking to our Spanish-speaking community, our Latino community that we serve at Adelante Mujeres. We are a nonprofit organization based in Forest Grove that empowers Latina women and their families here in Washington County through education and entrepreneurial programming. So the three topics that were identified with from the last forum that relate to education, economic empowerment, and civic engagement were right on point with the work that we're doing at Adelante. The first thing that we did is that we asked the participants, what could we do as a county, not just the entities, but as community members, to promote racial equity? And I really want to spend some of the points here, because I think that this slide here, just pretty much, if we all just followed these tips, I think that we would all live a very healthy life and community here. The first thing was respecting ourselves, right? And one another, learning about each other's races and cultures, really being open-minded about the diversity that we have in our county. Our participants also mentioned this idea of helping each other and applauding each other and being enthusiastic about the successes that we all have together. And that it didn't matter which race or group you were with or which nonprofit association you participated in, but that together as Washington County, we were one community and that we should celebrate that with each other. And of course, to promote racial equity, they mentioned access to resources for all, no matter your immigration status. With Adelante Mujeres, it's so important for us, but in our community here in Washington County, it's so important for us to really be in that place so that we understand that we have such a diversity in our county and that we do have a lot of immigrant community here. If we go over to the next slide, then we dove into the very specifics about education, economic empowerment, and civic engagement. On the education side, we have a lot of teachers in our program, but we also have a lot of parents in our programs. One of the main things, which actually did come out of the forum in January, was that there be diverse staff and teachers that represent the student body. We know that in our school districts, a lot of the professionals that work there may not look like the diversity that we have in the county. So how could the school districts, right, or how could those educational institutions really work towards something like that? Then there was that topic of, diversity, equity, and inclusion training for everyone, not just the professionals, but also parents and also the children. Because if we're all learning about each other's cultures and acceptance, then that would just be more powerful, right, for our community. There was mention about after-school activities and increasing that and making that more affordable and accessible to our families. Collaborating between school districts. What that meant was that there's some school districts that are doing really great work and others that perhaps had some areas for improvement. This is commentary from our participants. So important for us to listen, right, from the community. And this is what they were mentioning. And then, of course, and we've mentioned this many times, increasing parent involvement and really getting the parents involved in everything that's happening in the community and with their children. If we move on to the next slide, then we started asking about economic empowerment. So we asked all of our families, and including our small business participants at Adelante Mujeres, what the county could do to really improve equity within these topics. The first one was access to driver's licenses. For small business community, the not having an access to a driver's license is quite challenging because they are then unable to deliver their products and their services, have meetings with potential clients, and then having access to driver's license spreads across so many other things that include education, health, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to do my plug for HB 2015, if you'll support that, please. Thank you. The next topic was financial literacy for every single person in the family, not just the adults, not just the entrepreneur, but teaching our little ones from very young what financial literacy is so that when they grow up, they understood this idea of building wealth. Increasing small business training, teaching them how the system worked. So one comment related to this was, I don't know how the IRS works, and I feel like I'm getting, for lack of a better word, screwed by them because I don't know how to fill out, these paperwork, this tax. And then when they go to professionals, they're paying a lot of, it's valuable because they are investing in this, but they just want to understand basic system things like what does it actually mean to access a loan? And when you fill out loan paperwork, what is that? What am I actually signing? So really increasing more small business training in some of these areas was something that was a very strong point. There was mention about how municipalities or counties could really invest more in small businesses and provide some incentives. There's a very high cost of opening a small business, and there's some municipalities that are actually doing great work in this, and others that are investing in training programs that help facilitate some of these items. And then, of course, that documents be translated to various languages so that all of our entrepreneurial community could have the opportunity to be in compliance with local, state, and federal type of regulation. Finally, our civic engagement piece, we're asking the participants about equity here. Number one thing, diverse representation in elected and decision-making roles. I think that we're making some great strides here in the county as various training programs are coming up related to civic engagement. And that was the second point. Give more money to that, please, related to increasing training programs. Also this idea of starting young, really working with our youth to have them be civically engaged. But aside from them going to a training session, provide them with a mentor. Match them up to an elected official so that they can shadow them and so that they can learn and so that they can relate and say, yeah, one day I can actually be that and represent my community and be the voice for my community. And then finally, providing the safe and welcoming environments for civic engagement. So while we're training our community, when they actually do show up at some of these opportunities, are they being welcomed? Is their voice being heard? And how can we as entities in the county really facilitate that and be more responsive in some of those things? My last slide there's a lot of other topics, but I had to do a summary. I have to do an official shout out because I ended with civic engagement, and here in the county we have our Washington County civic leaders, and I would love it, please, if our civic leaders from Washington County could stand, because we have a few number of you guys here. Please get an applause. We're already starting to work on some of that. Thank you. So see, we're already doing some action from what's on this list. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Maribel. And now, Apana will share the results of its conversations. Please give a warm welcome to Jay Raj Singh from Apana.
Hey everyone, thank you all for being here and inviting me. Again, my name is Jay Raj Singh. I'm the Community Outreach Manager at Apano. So as a continuation of VAN's Collaborative Community Forum on January 31st, Apano conducted 2 sessions to delve deeper into the issues that were concerning the community. On Sunday, March 3rd, Apano held its first listening circle at the Sikh Center of Oregon Gurdwara in Beaverton. The listening circle was centered around those that identified as South Asian in Washington County. So we first talked about challenges and issues that were concerning individuals in the political context we're in. Issues such as access to affordable health care, housing, and quality education obviously emerged, but other issues including a sense of isolation, alienation, lack of representation in government also surfaced. One of the more prominent issues that continues to be discussed in our community is discrimination and bullying at schools, workplace, and public spaces. Everything from discrimination for loan approvals and acquiring housing and property to hate and bias incidents taking place towards South Asian youth in schools. We then delved into 3 specific areas based on the calls to action in the Leading with Race report by the Coalition of Communities of Color. In regards to equitable economic empowerment, topics such as financial literacy education, job forums, and equal pay for women was brought up. There was also a general need and demand for more intergenerational physical cultural spaces for our communities, especially elderly folks, where they can gather, share stories, celebrate, and learn. In regards to political representation and civic engagement, we heard that there was a need for more people with experiences represented in governmental positions, more civic education, and more events where representatives actually visit their own spaces. In regards to education, there was a demand for more cultural and diversity training for decision makers, education around anti-bullying, anti-hate, and bias, especially in schools, and generally more resources allocated to educational services. So the second session, if you can go to the next slide, was a town hall style event conducted on March 30th, where about 14 individuals from all backgrounds attended. Oregon State Representative Ken Helm, representing District 34 in Washington County, was one of the many legislators who was invited and was able to attend. Representative Ken Helm talked about his legislative priorities, and topics were mentioned from the audience included everything from educational opportunity and access for children whose parents are on work visas to climate resiliency planning, healthcare, political contribution caps, and pay equity for women and people of color in the workplace. So I want to thank the Vision Action Network and Coalition of Communities of Color for helping and supporting us to delve deeper into these issues and help Apano to base build in Washington County. The network we are building here is only the beginning of us co-creating an equitable, just, and inclusive community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay Raj. Finally, we have Bienstar to tell us about their conversations. Nathan? Please welcome Nathan to the stage. Thank you.
Muy buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan Teske. I'm the director of Bienstar. Just very briefly about my organization, we are a nonprofit affordable housing developer that focuses primarily on the Latino community in Washington County. We have a little over 500 units of housing, over 2,000 residents, primarily working families, and a lot of them, I think a majority of them are immigrant families as well. We hosted, following on the session back in January, Bienstar hosted 2 community conversations as follow-up. One of them was conducted with promotores, which are resident leaders in our different properties that are our link to the properties, to the community. They provide leadership in those communities and help provide services. We engage them, and I believe there's a slide there. We also had a session I'll tell you a little bit later about with high school age youth in our properties. You can see some of the key takeaways on the screen going back. The community members from the promotores felt that it was important to encourage participation, which is a theme I think you've heard from the 2 previous speakers. Some of them said that they sometimes feel uncomfortable speaking in majority white spaces. All of the promotores are Latina. They also find that sometimes there are no bilingual staff available or translated materials, sometimes making it difficult for them to engage in public events. Some of the solutions that they brainstormed together were trainings on cultural sensitivity and proficiency, particularly for school staff and government officials, and I think training on DEI has been a theme carrying back to the January session as well. Making public spaces diverse and welcoming, and more representation of communities of color in public life, including in government, which was another theme also that I took from the January session. Some of the resources that Washington County could help with would be reducing barriers for access to communities of color, bridging language and cultural differences so that families can get access to services as needed, and of course, if possible, bilingual staff and translated materials to support that. As it says here, the promotores expressed a great deal of hope in the potential for their future generations. Many of them, as I said, are immigrant families whose primary focus is on their kids and on making their kids successful, and youth leadership as being an important theme. Let's see. Oh, so this last slide, I'm sorry, jumping around. This last slide actually, I think, comes from the second conversation that Bienstar convened, which was with Latinx youth. We have a program to support Latino youth in our community to go to college or post-secondary education. So these were high school age students. They meet with us on weekends, and we support them to get financial aid and be successful in school. And so out of that group, the takeaways here on leadership were faith in future generations, making sure that high school students who are able to vote and are registered to vote. I think a theme also in that session was increasing representation of Latinx community in government, and you've seen that theme repeated several times already this evening. And then increased mentorship for youth of color to be able to step into positions of in government roles or other roles in the community. And so I think that about summarizes what we found in our 2 conversations. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. For those who are with us for the January forum, we decided to focus on 3 themes from the call to action from the Leading with Race report, and that's where our big ideas came from. We thought it'd be a good idea to revisit these themes as they are highlighted in the call to action. And I'd like to ask Fay Tumulty, the principal researcher of the Leading with Race report, to come share some of her thoughts with us. Please welcome Shweta.
Whoa, you were right. Hi, everyone. As she mentioned, my name is Fay Tumulty. I'm the research director at the Coalition of Communities of Color and the CCC, along with so many organizations and individuals present in this room, really lifted this project off the ground over 2 years, from 2016 to the summer of 2018. So just really want to commend the work that we have all done over this last couple of years, and really appreciative and grateful for the people in this room, especially those who have been warriors of justice in Washington County for such a long time, to welcome the CCC into the movement here and really give us the opportunity to support the work that's been going on. So I went back into that 394-page report. Boy, I do write a lot. And communities of color had a lot to say. And just went back in and really sort of refreshed my own memory about what communities of color were saying about education justice, economic justice, political power, and civic engagement. So what I want to share with you today is just a couple of brief sort of themes and findings that came up in these spaces across the 8 communities of color that were represented in the report. And I want to also highlight that there's a very specific and intentional reason why we attach the word justice at the end of each of these systems. We call them education justice, we call them economic justice, and that's because we think racial justice permeates all these systems and don't just need to be siloed off, that we need to apply a racial justice lens to each of these pieces. So when it came to education justice, some of the themes and findings that really came up in the Leading with Race report was about how, again, education and schools are never just about schools and education and academic outcomes. There's a lot that's going on in that space, especially around social isolation of students that connects to the bigger social isolation and sort of lack of community gathering that communities of color feel. So social isolation of students was a big theme. Lack of empathy or recognition of the ways in which students and families are experiencing oppression and institutional racism was another theme, something that really connects to sort of the training of parents and teachers that came up in other community conversations. There were communities that talked about experiencing racism of low expectations in schools, that students aren't expected to perform better than what they're performing. So sort of feeling that lack of validation from their teachers. There were themes of housing insecurity, chronic absenteeism, punitive disciplinary practices that walked side by side with sort of the lack of positive validation of bilingual and multilingual heritage and assets of students, of not seeing representation in curriculum, and so on. When it came to economic justice, there was a lot of focus on really thinking about how economic justice, again, ties into rebuilding communities from the ravages of colonialism, from forced displacement and displacement of lands, not just gentrification, but sort of the historic displacement of lands. Economic justice came up in relationship to communities of color needing money to invest in their healthcare, education, and nutrition. It came up in terms of, and Apano and Adelante Mujeres both sort of brought up this point around pay equity, that people of color earn less than white people at similar levels of education, and women of color earn the least. That's very, very telling of economic justice issues in Washington County. There were high rates of poverty, especially among women of color and single mothers of color. One of the pieces that came up that I just wanted to highlight, it's a very community-specific point, but one of the most cited reasons for putting Native American children in foster care is poverty and housing. So let's think about how economic injustices are being tied to separation of families in the very communities that have been ravaged by colonialism and genocide. So these were some of the pieces that came up in the economic justice space in the Leading with Race report. Next slide. Thank you. So when it came to political representation and civic engagement, we heard over and over again, even in this space, from communities of color that wanted to see themselves both as voters as well as leaders, right? And that's really important, that civic engagement shouldn't just end up being about engaging communities of color to vote for white leaders. It's about building leadership of color. A historical point to point out here is that Oregon voters only ratified the 15th Amendment in 1959. So the deliberate isolation, the deliberate disenfranchisement of communities of color in Oregon is very, very recent. More so, it wasn't until 1975 amendments to the Voting Rights Act that jurisdictions were required to provide election-related information to communities in languages other than English. So this is very, very recent, and we're fighting this battle right now in this space. Other things that came up from the focus groups as well as our interviews with community leaders was, again, leadership development to learn about how to run for office. It's not just enough to say we want more leaders of color to be in elected office. We know that this requires training, it requires financial resources and support. Other ideas that came up were around having POC-specific forums for electeds and candidates to come and speak to, very specific spaces of engagement for communities of color. Opportunities like the Beaverton Night Market, church and faith institutions, cultural events, schools where families are most likely to engage were identified as spaces for civic engagement and voter registration. The other piece that came up, and this maybe connects to the point that came up in Adelante Mujeres' community conversations, is that civic engagement should not be tied to immigration status as well, that we need to broaden our imagination, to radicalize our imagination, to think about how civic engagement can happen with immigrant communities, with communities that cannot vote, but are still wanting to be engaged, still want to build community here in Washington County. And again, the last piece that I want to point out is that even with civic engagement, economic justice and other type of injustices in different systems shows up, because economic injustices such as poverty, unemployment, and economic insecurity were identified as barriers for people to civically engage, whether as voters or as leaders. So that is my very, very quick sort of summary. I'm getting a thumbs up from Glenn, which I never get. So that's a very quick summary of sort of what came up in the Leading with Race report across these three themes for the 8 communities of color that spoke to those in power through this report. Thank you.
In a moment, I'm going to give you an opportunity to go back out into what we're calling the gallery, which was the lobby where you were all gathered when you first came in. And in addition to having a light meal, a little bit of time to eat and socialize, we're going to ask you to spend some time familiarizing yourself with what the jurisdictions have been doing. They've provided some summaries on some nice poster boards that we've got on display in that gallery area. And just out of interest of time and trying to get all of this in together, we're not going to have them present up here, but they will have staff available at the posters to talk with you, to answer questions, to go a little bit deeper into some of the content that is on the posters themselves. So I want to encourage you, actually, I'm going to give you a little assignment to, when you're out there and when you're having some dinner and doing a little bit of networking with each other, to make sure that you visit the jurisdiction that you live in and or work in. and then one or two others that you're interested in, that you'd like to see what they're doing, you'd like to perhaps provide some feedback to them about how they're doing and what things you think could be done. So that's going to happen in a moment. If you are with friends and colleagues, what I'm going to encourage you to do is try to split up and divide and conquer, as it were. So try to cover more territory that way, because you're not going to have a chance to eat and to see everything and to talk to everyone. So see if you can collaborate with some folks and then exchange notes later on what you discovered. We're curious. We just want to get a little bit of feedback from you about what you talked about during dinner and what you saw on the posters. Any highlights that you have? Anything that jumped out at you? Something that was inspirational? Something that made you think about something you hadn't thought about before? So if anybody wants to have an opportunity, we're just going to take a couple of minutes before we go into our World Cafe. So does anybody have a thought that comes to mind that you'd like to share? If you do, just raise your hand high and we will come find you. Okay, there's a gentleman in the back. And if you would be so kind as to introducing yourself, let us know who you are.
Alice Berry, work for Intel. My comment goes and resides that many of our local governments seem to be very early in their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, which I definitely want to commend them on getting on that train, but it kind of surprised me that they seem to be a little bit early and nascent on that journey.
All right. An observation that we're on the spectrum, we're all on the spectrum somewhere in this journey, but it seems that a lot of the jurisdictions are on the earlier part of that journey. Thank you. Anyone else have an observation? Two here. So Sally, you can make your way over here, please. And Carol, if you would.
She's got it.
Oh, good.
I was really impressed with the city of Forest Grove. So many practical things that they've implemented. Two that come immediately to mind. One is they reorganized the public library to make the multicultural materials more accessible. How amazing is that? Everybody can do that. That's an easy one. And they provided bonuses to staff members who achieved certain scores on bilingual exams to encourage people or incentivize people to better be able to deal with the public that comes in. So kudos to the city of Forest Grove. Great job over there.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Sally, I think right here. And if you would like to introduce yourself, feel free.
Hi, my name is Zahra Abukar. I'm with Center for African Immigrant and Refugee Organization. That's a mouthful, so Cairo. But yeah, I went to the Washington County General poster, and I mentioned that I've lived in Washington County for around 12 years, and I've never worked in Washington County, and I would like to, so I was looking at that they're adapting an interim EDI plan to include recruiting, hiring, and retaining diverse pool of applicants, but that's very in the early stages. So I was as well surprised as gentleman earlier said. Hopefully, in the next 10 years, I get to work in Washington County.
Good. Wonderful. Sally, right behind you there.
Luis Nava, I was willing to see anybody else from our school districts, and I didn't see anybody else yet. And also when I was checking outside the boards, I didn't see, we got a big in the center, education, and the guys that are in charge of our education, they are not here. Why?
Are there anybody, I know we do have some registrants from the school districts. I know some were not able to come. They wanted to, and they responded to me in the invitation. But who represents school districts here? Wonderful. Okay. You're right. And that's an area. Yeah. At the last event, we had more representation from staff from the school districts, but this time around, they were unable to come. Shweta, yes, hand up. Thank you for the comment.
I just got here, sorry. I am running for the Forest Grove School District, so I am present.
Good, good. Any other comments before we move on to our World Cafe? Okay. I have another lost and found item. Oh, we have one more comment?
Yeah, quick comment.
And you are, sir?
My name is Komi Calavor. I work with Washington County. So these diversity and equity initiatives, they work when the top executives are engaged. And that was the question I asked every poster, Forest Grove, Hillsborough, Tigard, Cornelius, and Washington County. All the chief executives are engaged, and I was very encouraged about that.
Good.
So the chance of success is very high, at least.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Komi. And I want you to ask yourself these questions. What does your community look like if this idea or these interrelated ideas become a reality? What does the community look like? I want you to think about, what does the community look like if we increase access for participation on boards and commissions? What will that do for us? What will be the outcome? And how does the presence of racial equity, racial justice, impact your community in that new state of being? Okay, so this is big vision. You're not going to get a lot of time to think about this. I want you to just react to this intuitively and viscerally. What does the community feel like? What does it look like? How do I feel in this community? And it doesn't matter that you're all from different communities. Talk from your own experience of what that looks like. And try to capture that on paper. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. And then we will move on to round 2. Are there any questions before we start with this round? All right. Choose your scribe and have a wonderful conversation.
There'd be acceptance of each other.
Everybody truly has access to leadership, just like the community.
Ultimately, it goes to making a transfer. So
I want some people of color that look like the children.
Multiple times throughout the year. It's not just SAT prep.
Believe it or not, it's just a few minutes. Distribute every care.
So there would, provided that they were sponsored by cities.
So if you already haven't had a chance to do so, once I'm done kind of giving you your next prompts, feel free to introduce yourself, get to know your neighbors, your new neighbors. Scribes, spend just a minute or two giving them a brief recap of what you talked about. And then we'll go to the next prompts. And I'm gonna go to those right now so that I don't have to interrupt you one more time. So the next couple of questions that we have are going to take us from that big long-term vision. And now we're going to really cast back to a medium and short term, a 2 to 3 year time frame. Okay, so we're taking ourselves from long-term, here's where we want to be, this is how we've kind of described what it looks like. And now, in 2 to 3 years, let's consider these questions. What actions could be taken over the next 2 to 3 years to make this best idea, or this big idea, a reality? And when we're moving forward in that, what do we anticipate in terms of barriers? Where do we think we're going to run into some problems? What are the challenges? And how are we going to address them? How are we going to overcome those barriers? So now thinking about that 2 to 3 year time frame, what kind of activities are needed to achieve this long-term, to get this trajectory going into that long-term vision? And when we come across barriers, what are they and how are we going to overcome them? Okay? No, because I've seen that some sheets are completely full. I mean, this was a wonderful experiment. As I watched people, I saw some tables were like, and then we're going to have this, and we're going to have this. And there's like, the table was, the paper was completely full in about 10 seconds. And then there were other tables that were talking very methodically. Well, what idea do you think we should do? And they were like planning and plotting, and nothing had gotten written down for 8 minutes. But then all of a sudden the page was full in the last 2 minutes. So it's wonderful to see the different styles. So start with a fresh piece of paper if you need it, or build on what you've got, whatever you need. So hopefully we've got enough paper. If you run out, let us know. We will get some more paper. Okay? So those are your questions. You're going to have about 15 minutes, maybe 20. We're falling behind time, so we need to kind of think quickly. Again, just use that principle of blink and whatever comes to mind. Toss it out. Talk about it. Write it down. Any questions? All right. Go for it, scribes.
So if you're talking about like let's say youth mentorship program, you could go and you could have a minority teacher or something like that. I know one school that 89% are educated, especially in elementary and
Parks districts. And it will be
All right. So, I think we're all settled. Our third round. So, you know, one of the wonderful things about doing this World Cafe is that you get to see what other people created before you. And without any real judgment, you're building on that. So this is like an exercise in improvisation almost. You're trying to take these ideas that you didn't necessarily have any ownership of, and you're saying, yes, and how about this? And so you're building on that. And if you're someone who lives or works in Forest Grove and you're sitting at a table that's predominantly Tigard or Hillsborough, that doesn't matter. These ideas were built by a whole bunch of people, and you get to just be as ingenious and as creative, as bold, as passionate, and as provocative as you want. Because you're going to be talking about Hillsborough maybe, but you live in Forest Grove, but Hillsborough is going to have to do it. So you guys get to create these things, and together we're going to figure out where the common themes are and where the beautiful ideas and commitments have come from. And we're going to share that with everyone that's been involved and hope that we've lit enough little fires that we start creating a big bonfire and some real change. So in this third round, we are going to ask you to start thinking about immediate actions, okay? So the first question that I want you to be able to consider, what commitments are necessary to act on these best ideas? So we just spent time thinking about, well, what would we do over the next 2 to 3 years? What does that require? What commitments? You may have already started answering that question. You may already be ahead of me. But if you haven't, think about what commitments are necessary. What immediate actions would you take in order to fulfill those commitments or to make those things happen? And lastly, how will you hold yourself accountable? When do you get to declare that you've achieved those things, that you've fulfilled those commitments? How do you measure that success, and how do we hold each other accountable? So those are your 3 questions. This is immediate now. We're down to what's going on today. What do we want to see happening now? Any questions about that? All right, so scribes, give a lay of the land, and then let's spend about 15 minutes, no more, and then we're going to have to sprint to the finish line. If we only have 2 people, you might want to get creative and move your chairs over to another spot. Are you civic engagement? Oh, if anybody wants to join the table of 2 because they're feeling a little lonely, or do you want to join that table of 3 over there? You can join. Merge your ideas. All right, any other questions? Let's go.
What is a model we can use? People have probably done this internationally. So we don't have to worry about transportation. Employers might.
I didn't see anything.
How do I get the community? The school district is leading the path that we can follow.
I'm giving you the table, and I asked you. And you need to start that not a couple months before when it needs to.
We're going to gather this information, and it is going to be quite an exercise because I can see a lot of good work has been done here in a very short period of time. So thank you for that. I'm going to let Chi ask our final question.
So now that we've done this magic making together, now we turn inward with our own individual intentions. So on each of your tables, there's going to be Post-its. Make sure that you each take one. Give you some time to do that real quick. But once you get the Post-its, if you can turn your attention to the back of the room, to my right of the sound box is a white whiteboard. Thank you. So for the next couple of minutes, if you can consider what you personally can commit to as an individual. So write down your personal intention on this note card. As an individual working to advance racial equity here in Washington, Oregon, or Washington County, I commit to ... fill in the rest for what it is that you personally can set your intention to. So go with your intuition. Don't think about it too hard, but you've got 2 minutes.
So I want to thank you all for the engagement, the focused attention that you've given tonight. I hope that this experience was a positive one for you. I hope that whatever you wrote down is something that inspires you. When you walk out tonight, you can take that sticky note and you can put it on that whiteboard that she had pointed out. And if you didn't get a chance to go push the pins into the map over in the far right of the gallery, feel free to do that. There's the white pins for where you live and the red pins for where you work. I want to thank, beyond our audience here, Sunrise Church. I want to give them a big round of applause for this space. For Aaron, the associate pastor, Aaron in the back, who's been helping with our AV. Thank you, Aaron. And I should be advancing slides now. Uh-oh, I just lost it. I turned it off. Oh, well. My volunteers, there it is. My volunteers, we've got Mandy and Carol and Sushmita. Thank you, volunteers. They were running around helping make sure things ran smoothly. I would also like to take a moment to ask our elected officials to please stand up, because they show up at way too many of these meetings. That is a huge commitment they make, so please give them a round of applause for being here tonight. Thank you, elected officials. These were the diehards that stood out till the end. So we're going to be taking the information that you have created for us tonight. We will spend the time distilling it and synthesizing it and sharing it out with you as soon as we can. We are also contemplating what we need to be doing next. As I mentioned in January, this work has just begun for us. We are at the early stages, as some of you have already recognized and articulated here tonight. So we want to walk this journey with you. We want to figure out how we can be most effective at gathering folks, whether it's large convenings like this or looking at more localized efforts. Now that we've got some ideas on paper, what might we be doing in some of our cities and in our county? So we will be thinking about that. You can feel free to reach out to us and offer your ideas and let us know how you want to be engaged. But our commitment to you is that the work isn't done, it never will be done, and we will keep moving forward with you. Thank you all for being here tonight, and good night.